Welcome everyone, this is Bill Lester here, and on the next two videos we're going to talk a little bit about plants. This is a really huge subject, so all we're going to be able to do is just basically scratch the surface, but we're going to cover some of the different basic parts of plants and a little bit about how we go about classifying plants also. So going through some definitions, botany is a science of plants, their classification and study. And horticulture is the practical part or the art and science of cultivating flowers, fruits, vegetables, and ornamental plants. So what exactly is a plant? Technically, a plant is a photosynthetic multicellular organism and it's capable of manufacturing its own food. Plants, along with certain types of bacteria and algae, are the only organisms that are able to generate their own food without having to consume something else for energy. Now, plant classification is called taxonomy. People like to group things and put them into groups to be able to better understand them, and plants are no exception. A lot of the different areas that we're going to study in this course, whether it's insects, nematodes, plants, fungi, bacteria, are all classified. They're all broken down into groups so that we can better understand them. So there's a lot of different methods for identifying or grouping plants, and we're going to cover a couple of the different ways that plants can be classified or grouped. One way that we can group plants is by their life cycle. Annual plants tend to be short-lived plants. Their entire life cycle is completed in one growing season. This is very important because a lot of people think that an annual may live for 1 year. Not necessarily. Here in Florida, and this is especially important when we go to study weeds, we have warm season annual weeds and cool season annual weeds. Cool season annual weeds grow from maybe September till May, which is well under 1 year. So an annual plant isn't something that grows for 1 year, it just grows for one season. Biennials take 2 seasons to complete their life cycle. We don't encounter too many plants that are biennials, but there are some. And then perennials are plants or trees or other organisms that live for a number of years. So they live year after year. They may die back during the winter, lose their leaves, but they're going to come back and grow again the next year. We can group plants by their morphology or appearance. We have evergreen trees, we have deciduous trees. Those are trees that lose their leaves for at least a certain period of time during the year. We have woody plants, we have herbaceous plants, vines, trees, shrubs. They could be grouped or identified by the type of leaves that they have. We're going to look at that in a little bit. And then they can also be grouped by the type of fruits they have, type of seeds. So there's a lot of different ways that we can classify plants. We can group plants by the type of environment they prefer to live in. Some plants are referred to as hardy, other ones are tender. They're temperate, tropical, subtropical. Here in Central Florida, we're in a subtropical region. Down in the very southern tip of Florida, it's a true tropical area down around Miami and Homestead. Further north, that's called temperate. That's where you have warm summers, but you also have very cold winters. They can be grouped by warm season, cool season. That's how we group a lot of our vegetables that we grow here and a lot of weeds. So once again, there's a lot of different ways that we can group plants. We can group plants by their usage, how we use them. We have fruits, we have vegetables, we have ornamental plants. But in the world of science, we have a system called scientific nomenclature to classify and group plants by. This way, every different species of plant has its own specific name, and no matter where you are in the world, if you're in the United States, if you're in the Soviet Union, wherever it might be, everybody knows the plant by that name. A lot of times we call plants by a common name, and the problem with that is different people use different common names. People in different parts of the country might call it different things, and that's not very specific. So under scientific nomenclature, starting at the very top largest group, you have a kingdom. We all know that we have an animal kingdom. We also have a plant kingdom. Below that is further divided into divisions. One group is ferns, and then spermatophytes are seed-bearing plants. Below that is further broken down under the seed-bearing plants into different classes. One class is gymnosperms. They make naked seeds. Some examples are pine trees, and we're going to look at some more examples in a moment. And then angiosperms, which are plants that have seeds that are surrounded by some type of fruit. Breaking it down even further, this is where it gets a little confusing. We go down to subclasses, and that's broken down into either monocots, which are plants that when they first sprout only come up with one leaf, or dicots, which are plants when they sprout they come up with two leaves. There's some other differences, and we're going to look at all these different groupings in just a moment, but this is generally how the plant kingdom is broken down. So we can thank Mr. Linnaeus for this system of identifying plants and animals and all other living species on the face of the earth. Um, you may hear it referred to as the Latin name sometimes. So as things are broken down further and further, you get into smaller and smaller groups. It goes down to order. Plants are broken up into families, which is just a much smaller group of more closely related plants. And then every individual plant is broken down to a genus and a species. In a genus, you may have a number of members in it, but every species, every living species of plant or animal has a specific genus and species name of it. So let's look at some of the different groups of plants. Now, it's not really important that you memorize the exact classification and breakdown of the plant kingdom, but it's important that you know what plants are related because they're going to share a lot of the same characteristics if they're closely related. One large class of plants is called gymnosperms. Gymno stands for naked and sperme stands for seeds, so they're going to have naked seeds. Some of the different plant families that fall under this grouping that are gymnosperms: Cupressaceae, Cycadaceae, which are sago palms, Ginkgoaceae, which are ginkgo trees, Pinaceae, those are pine trees, Podiocarpaceae, those are podocarpus bushes, Taxaceae, Zamiaceae, which are kuntis. So all these are in the same group and they're going to share a lot of the same characteristics. So all these plants create seeds without any kind of fruit. They include cycads and conifers. Now, some of these plants will create a male plant and a female plant. They're separate. And some of them will create a plant that has both male and female parts on it. If you have a plant that has separate male and female plants, it's called dioecious. That means two different houses. If you have an evergreen that has both male and female flowers on it, that's called dioecious. This is kind of important because there are some evergreen trees and bushes that people buy, and they buy them specifically because they want to see them flower and create fruit that birds will eat in the winter. But of course, if they have a male version of that tree or a male member of it, it's not going to produce the fruit. But a much larger group of plants are called angiosperms. Angio means container and sperme means seeds. So these are plants that have their seed in some type of container or fruit. Now these plants are further broken down into monocots or dicots, which becomes very important, like I said earlier, when we start looking at different weeds and other plants and even trees, because different trees are created differently internally depending on what group they're from. So looking at some of the ways that you can tell the difference between whether a plant is a monocot or a dicot, there's several different ways. The two easiest ways to tell is when the plant first sprouts, does it come out of the ground with just one leaf? If it does, it's a monocot. If it comes out of the ground with two leaves, like a bean plant, it's a dicot. If you look at the leaves and the veins in the leaves are net-like, they radiate out from a central area, it's a dicot. If the veins on the leaf are all parallel, it's a monocot. Grasses are monocots, palm trees are monocots, corn is monocots, so are bananas and a number of bamboos. But if you look very closely at the leaves, if the veins are all parallel, it's a monocot. If they're not parallel, it's a dicot. You can also tell if it's flowering by the number of petals it has in it, the number of flower parts, whether it's a monocot or a dicot. Something that's very important is a monocot, all the vascular tissues inside of the stem or inside of the trunk are scattered throughout the entire trunk. If you look at the bottom picture, dicots, all the vascular tissue is in a ring just inside the bark. This is going to be very important when we get to trees. So you'll need to remember this information when we start talking about trees, because if a tree is a dicot and its vascular system is right underneath the bark, anything that damages the bark and a little bit below it is going to seriously damage the tree and potentially kill it. If a tree is a monocot, let's say a palm tree, its bark can be damaged. It could even be girdled, but it's still able to move nutrients and water up and down because its vascular tissue is scattered throughout the entire stem. So this is going to be important a little bit later on. So here's another illustration of some of the differences between monocots and dicots. Like I already mentioned, if when the plant sprouts, like if you've ever grown corn before, when it comes out of the ground, just one little leaf comes up. So that means that it's a monocot. If you've ever tried growing green beans before, when it first comes out of the ground, two leaves come up. So it's a dicot. Mono means one and di means two. So to make things a little bit more confusing, with a lot of ornamental plants and also food crops and vegetables, we have something that's called a cultivar. Cultivar stands for cultivated variety. So you can have a number of different cultivars of one species of plant. All of them are all the exact same species, although the different cultivars may look very different. They have different colored leaves, different colored flowers. You may think that they're very different, but genetically it's the same species. So botanical varieties naturally breed true from seed, and cultivars are always asexually cloned, or it's a controlled sexual crossing of breed lines. So when it comes to scientific nomenclature, a couple points to remember. This is the most commonly used system of nomenclature. Like I said earlier, it avoids a lot of the problems with common names because 10 different people may have 10 totally different common names for the exact same plant. If we assign every plant one specific name that every scientist in the world understands and goes by, it makes communication a lot easier. The system is not static. Every once in a while they'll change the names of species, families, just to make it a little bit more confusing, it seems like. As you move down through the different sections, the plants are more closely related. So everything in the plant kingdom is in one way or another related. But once you move down to the different groups, the classes, once you get down to family, the members of one family are all pretty closely related. Once you go down to genus, you're going to have even fewer members and they're going to be even more closely related. And scientific nomenclature a lot of times is based on flower and plant morphology. That's why people who identify plants for a living, like at the University of Florida in the botanical section, a lot of times if you send them a picture or an example of just a leaf, they can't identify it. They can give you an idea of what it might be or what family it might be from. But if you send them flowers, seeds, and fruits, they can do a much better, easier job of identifying them. So being able to look at a plant, its leaves, its flowers, its fruits, and to be able to identify it down to its family is a valuable skill. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of learning. There's a lot of really good reference books that break plants all the way down to families, and being able to tell what family it's in tells you a lot about what kind of insect pests it may have, because insects tend to feed on either very specific individual plants or they'll feed on every plant in the family. Same thing with diseases. Plants in the same family tend to get the same diseases, so it is a valuable skill to have and information to have. You have to look at the botanical characteristics and see if you can kind of get a feeling from the leaves or from the flowers if it reminds you of another plant. And like I said, we have a lot of references, a lot of different keys that could be used to break plants down to either family or even better, genus and species. So here's a couple lists of some very common different plant families that hopefully you'll become a little bit more familiar with soon. Anacardiaceae, Apocynaceae, Cruciferae, those are cruciferous vegetables, things like broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. Fagaceae, those are oak trees, so all the different members of Fagaceae are all oak trees. Gramineae, those are grasses. That includes things like bananas, corn, and a lot of all the roadside grasses, a lot of the different weeds of lawns and lawn grasses. Labiatae, leguminous. I'm really butchering some of the names here, but legumes are beans. Now these include green beans, pole beans, different beans that you eat. It includes a lot of trees also. Any tree that flowers and makes a bean pod, basically is a container for its seeds, is a legume. Rosaceae, that's the rose family. That includes roses and a lot of other flowering and fruiting trees. You should be starting to notice that all these different family names in an ACE, which is ACEAE, that works the same for insects. That works the same for a lot of different living organisms, but it holds true in the different plant families also. So if you see a name of a group of insects or plants that ends in ACE, you know that that's the name of the family. Asteraceae includes a lot of common flowers. Brassicaceae is the, I think, old name for Cruciferaceae. I'm not sure which one is being used nowadays. Poaceae is a different name that was used for different grasses. Lamiaceae is mints. Ericaceae is palms. Zamiaceae is plants like kuntis. So you see, knowing all these plant family names better than I do is definitely a help. So here's an example of different various cultivars of one plant. Now, all the plants that you see pictured here in this slide are all the exact same botanical species, Brassica oleracea. But depending on how they've been crossbred and developed, broccoli, kohlrabi, kale, and cabbage are all different cultivars of the same species. So we can botanically break things down even lower than species if you want to. Technically, cabbage can physically breed and cross-pollinate with broccoli or kohlrabi, and they do that to try to create new vegetable varieties. So all of these, like I said, are different cultivars of the exact same species. So that's about it for part one of plant botany. Coming up is section 2, where we're going to go through this a little bit more. Of course, like always, if you have any specific questions, make sure you bring them to class with you. Always feel free to give me a call, email. You can contact me through the class Canvas site. Thank you very much.